We're now moving out of the review and into our first major topic of the series, which is VLANs. Nothing can be bigger in the network world in the last decade than VLANs and how they've reshaped our entire landscape of the network. So to start things off, we'll take a look at what normal switches do, some of the challenges that we experience even in a normal switch network. Then we'll see how VLANs and trunks address those issues. We'll define what VLANs are, and then we'll talk about the counterpart that goes right with them, and that is trunk connections. Finally, we'll look at the flexibility of VLANs, and I want to present kind of a design option of what VLANs can do for a business or an organization and giving you flexibility with how you use your network. With that foundation in place, let me be the first to welcome you to the world of VLANs. I kind of think of VLANs like I think about my microwave oven. About 2 weeks ago, my microwave broke down, and we called the repair guy, and he said, "Oh, my first availability is in a week and a half." And I was like, "Oh yeah, they'll go ahead and put us on the calendar." And then my wife said, "Well, we're going to be without a microwave oven." I said, "Microwave oven? Who needs them, right? You got a stove. It's just kind of the laziness factor." I'm telling you, after about 3 days without a microwave oven, I need a microwave oven. I couldn't handle it. I called the repair guy. I said, "Don't worry about it. We're going to get a new one." And we were that desperate for a microwave oven. I mean, we have a little infant to warm up the food. We had to put on it was horrible. Horrible. So it's not like you can't survive without microwave ovens. In the same way, it's not like networks don't work without VLANs, but they're so convenient and so powerful. You see the tie-in there, that everybody uses them. What a VLAN does is logically group users. Let's get to the official information right here. It logically groups our users together. So over here, imagine that we had two groups of users in our organization, the marketing group, surrounded by pink, and the sales group, surrounded by blue. So what I could do with VLANs is actually group those people together, where the blue ports are now isolated to the blue ports. And this is the most accurate statement here. It segments their broadcast domain. So if a sales PC sends a broadcast, it's only going to come out the blue ports. You can see we've got some blue ports on some other switches as well that will receive the broadcast, and this guy down here gets the broadcast. It does not affect the pink ports, and if the pink computer sends a broadcast, only the pink PCs will end up receiving that. So you completely isolate all of those broadcast domain into two separate groups. Now, as a side note, before we get too deep into VLANs, if the blue users send a broadcast, it comes out all the blue ports, right? Saw that? Pink users send a broadcast, comes out all the pink ports. If that's the case, what VLAN do these ports belong to? You're probably thinking the answer is both. And that is absolutely correct. That is what Cisco calls a trunk port. A trunk port, just think of it like the trunk of your car. If it's like mine, you got everything in there, and everything goes across the trunk port. So when you are using VLANs, the trunk will carry all VLAN traffic between your switches. And that's what allows your VLANs to span beyond just a single switch. Otherwise, without trunk ports, we would have separate VLANs on all our switches that couldn't communicate. So the VLAN segment broadcast domains, it also correlates to a subnet. I actually saw a statement on Cisco's website when I was looking for some VLAN information. I thought it was great. They said a VLAN equals a broadcast domain equals a subnet, meaning all of those things are equal terms. So for our marketing group, we would be 172.16.1.0/24, and our sales group might be 172.16.2.0/24. They are on separate subnets, even though all you see here is a switch. Now keep in mind that when you set up VLANs, and we use our VLANs in this kind of design, these people cannot reach each other. Marketing people cannot reach salespeople and vice versa, and that provides a great level of access control if that's what we want. Now, we'll talk about routing between VLANs in some of the upcoming videos, which is something that you need to do. If you want salespeople to be able to talk to marketing people, you would have to get a router that's able to route between those two separate VLANs. The blue people would come into the router and exit onto the red VLAN and so on. But that's a big topic. We'll talk more about that later. The last thing that VLANs are used for is quality of service. So I can separate the prioritized traffic from the not so prioritized. For example, kind of flush this sales and marketing picture out of your mind. Imagine that the pink VLAN represented the PCs, and the blue VLAN represented phones. Phones, you say? Phones, I say. We have nowadays IP phones that plug into a network. So these IP phones have traffic that, I mean, it comes out, it's very small. IP phones don't generate much traffic, but that traffic has to be protected from everything else. All of the computers will step all over your IP phone traffic. I mean, think of the IP phone traffic as a delicate little flower. It's so small and pretty. And it comes into the switch and it's just kind of floating along, trying to get to another IP phone that's on the network somewhere. And these PCs right here are these football players. I can't draw that. And they're running all over the network trying to gobble up as much bandwidth as they can. Well, when you pit a football player against a flower, if you don't do something about it, that poor flower is going to get crushed. Where am I going with this? Quality of service. Sometimes I lose myself. Quality of service allows me to say the flower, the voice over IP, or whatever my priority traffic is, gets carried above all the rushing football players running around my network, which is the pink VLAN, the PCs in this case. So VLANs will allow me to logically separate them and isolate them from each other. Before we can truly understand and appreciate the benefits of VLANs, we need to hit some key points of the normal switching world, review some of those key concepts. First off, if we just have this usual switch here, any switch that you can pick up from Best Buy or any electronics store, you're automatically going to get one collision domain per port. And that's a good thing. That means that every computer that's plugged into that switch can send and receive at the same time, if they're operating in full duplex mode, as any other. So this computer could be sending and receiving along with this one, and that's okay. That's a huge stride forward from the hub world, where only one device plugged into the hub could send or receive at a time. Notice I said send or receive. That's the half duplex world. Second piece of the switch world is that we have broadcasts sent to all ports by design. When this computer sends a broadcast into the switch will send it out every single port except the port it received it on, and all the devices will receive it. And that's great because broadcasts are necessary. They help us locate services. It helps computers advertise services. And there's a whole other plethora of uses for broadcasts. But as this network grows, and we plug in another switch here, and another one here, and link one off here, and you just start getting more and more clients attached, those broadcasts start becoming a problem. They cause a network slowdown where everybody receives these broadcasts and it starts becoming too overwhelming. Now, different people will tell you different guidelines for how big the network can get. Cisco's rule of thumb is once you reach 500 PCs or 500 devices on a network, that's where it's time to divide up and separate networks. That's a pretty liberal amount. I've seen most people in practical use, somewhere around 200-300 PCs will segment it off and start another network because the broadcast will start slowing down the network and all the devices that are plugged into it. Now down below that you see one subnet per LAN. Meaning in the normal switching world, if we have all these switches daisy chained together, and I said this is the 172.16.1.0 network, that means all the PCs plugged into there have to start with 172.16.1. something. This one might be .50 or this might be .51. If I were to go off a limb and just say, well, let's go ahead and make this one 172.17.1.50. or 51/24 and say, let's just do that. That immediately this computer would be isolated from the rest. Even though it's plugged into the same switch, it could not reach anyone because logically speaking, it thinks it's on a separate network than everybody else. So it's going to try and go to its default gateway to reach things that are in this subnet. Finally, in the normal switching world, we have very limited access control. And what that means is that it's very difficult for me to restrict this computer from reaching that computer. There's ways to do it, but they are extremely painful. It involves assigning access lists to each individual port. And we'll talk about access lists later on, but it's just not something that's practically done. So in a flat switch network, meaning a single broadcast domain where one broadcast can reach everybody, it's very difficult, nearly impossible, to prevent devices from accessing each other fully. Before we go on, let me just mention that a lot of the analogies you hear me use, I don't really plan. They just kind of come to me as I'm talking. I paused the video between this slide and the last, and I thought, flowers? Where did that come from? Hopefully it helped demonstrate the purpose of VLANs. So let's talk more about the flexibility of VLANs and why they're so powerful. With VLANs, you get segmentation of users without routers. Without routers, before VLANs, there was just no way to separate users apart. And also, one of the problems of routers is that you were limited to physical location. Let me give you an example. Let's say this was a network of yesteryear. We had building A, building B, and building C, and let's say it's a college campus. Well, if that were the case, we would have to have routers going between these buildings that would allow them to connect together and still allow the users to be separate, meaning I've got one subnet of people in this building and one subnet of people over here. If we didn't have routers between the buildings and everybody was just linked up, one broadcast would flood the whole network. So we would just tie routers together. Well, with VLANs, we can segment our users between the buildings without even needing routers in place. I can say building B is isolated to the blue users. Building A is isolated to the pink users. Now, you might see, well, what's that blue guy doing there? That's some more of the flexibility of VLANs. Before, if we had a blue user that was in this building, I mean, maybe building A faced a flowing river, and the blue users here represent, it's a college, right? So it's the College of Art. So let's say that one of the users from this blue network said, you know, I just feel inspired when I look out the window and I see the water flowing to paint the beautiful paintings. He said, I can't sit and be inspired in building B. I want to sit in building A. Well, if we were in the old routed world and we wanted this user to stay on the building B subnet, because maybe the red VLAN over here or the red users represent the administration, and there's been some, College of Art users hacking into the administration, so we wanted to separate them. You see where I'm going with this? The point is that if we had the routed world, the only way to get that user in the building A on building B's network would be to run an extra long Ethernet cable. Remember, they go 100 meters. An extra long Ethernet cable between the two buildings and plug that user in. Now that we have VLANs, I can assign one port in building A to the College of Art VLAN and allow that user to connect. So even though he's sitting right next to one of the college administrators, he cannot access their PC. The user can look out the window, be inspired, and be on the College of Art network without having to be physically plugged into the College of Art building. So that's what I mean when I say no longer limited to the physical location. You can see over here in building C, we also have an IP phone that might be on, some other VLAN that's separated from everybody else, and we isolate those. And we could put IP phones in every single building that everybody uses and allow those to be all on the same network that cannot be touched by the PC. That's really good because there's already programs out there that will allow you to sniff the network, like tap into the network and capture the voice over IP packets and assemble them into a normal WAV file or MP3 file. So I could actually, it's kind of like if you come from the telephone background, it's like a butt set where you tap into the wires and you can hear the conversations that are going on. But people could just do it from their own computers unless you separate those phones from the rest of the network, and that's one of the powers of VLANs. So with VLANs, you also have tighter control of broadcast. One broadcast within the blue VLAN stays within the blue VLAN. A broadcast in the red VLAN or pink VLAN stays in the pink VLAN. Because of their importance to the network world, all I wanted to do as we start off into the world of switch VLANs was give you a base understanding of what a VLAN is and what trunks do. We'll expose more of the technical details as we dig deeper in this content. So let's review. We first saw the view of a normal switch, where every single port is its own collision domain. The entire switch and all the switches that are plugged in with crossover cables are one broadcast domain. So one broadcast will go through them all, and that can cause a lot of congestion the bigger it gets. It's also very difficult to control access into those normal switches of what devices can access each other because everybody's one subnet. So as we get into the VLANs, we see those problems solved. The VLANs are our way of segmenting the switches into separate broadcast domains or separate subnets. That gives us more control over where the broadcasts go, gives us the ability to do quality of service and prioritize traffic, and it gives us the ability to do access control as we divide people into separate subnets. The trunks are just the links that are going between the switches that carry all VLAN traffic. It's where every VLAN will be allowed to traverse that trunk, and that's what allows us to have multiple VLANs on one switch that can span down to VLANs on another switch. Now, last but not least, we talked about the flexibility of VLANs and saw some of the possible design options where with VLANs you can actually span between buildings and have people in separate buildings that are normally on different subnets be a part of the same subnet because we've used VLANs to do our segmentation. It gives us ultimate flexibility with where our users are located because we're no longer limited to the physical location. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.